After the troublemaking woman left, there was no more beautiful sight for the onlookers to behold. Thus, the shop assistants from the Yang family's medicine shop quickly scattered and returned to work. Zhang Dafeng timidly ran over and squatted under the eaves, staying far away from Old Man Yang. He didn't dare to get too close to him. Both he and Li Er were disciples of Old Man Yang, yet the treatment they received from him couldn't be more stark in contrast. Zhang Dafeng was also frustrated that his master was biased, but there were some things that he had no option but to accept. "Master, it looks like Qi Jingchun is hellbent on breaking the rules. What should we do then?" he asked nervously. Old Man Yang remained silent as he continued to puff away at his smoking pipe. At some unknown time, a black cat suddenly ran over from some unknown place, and it shook its body dry as it sat near the old man's feet, sending water flying everywhere. Zhang Dafeng was filled with worry as he said, "That bastard from True Martial Mountain actually summoned a deity from his sect. Will that cause any trouble? After all, countless people have their eyes on this small world." Old Man Yang continued to remain silent. Zhang Dafeng was accustomed to his master's silence, so he didn't find the atmosphere awkward at all. His thoughts ran wild, and his mind wandered to Qi Jingchun again. Fucking hell! Qi Jingchun, you've cowardly abided by the rules for 59 years, yet you can't persist for just a few more days? Sure enough, scholars are brain-dead fools. They're simply impervious to reason, he cursed. You might not be a scholar, but you're also brain-dead, Old Man Yang finally said. Zhang Dafeng wasn't embarrassed, and instead turned around with an obsequious smile, asking, "Master, do you want me to massage your shoulders and legs for you? I don't have any wealth for you to inherit, so it's best that you give up now," the old man replied indifferently. Zhang Dafeng was slightly red with embarrassment as he corrected his master, saying, "Master, your words are so hurtful. Your disciple might not be the most capable person ever, but I'm definitely a dutiful and respectful person. How could I be coveting your wealth? It's not like I'm Li Er's wife or anything. You're even inferior to her," the old man remarked. Zhang Dafeng's expression became dark, and he hung his head in complete dejection. It was as if he had lost all his energy and spirit. However, his face suddenly lit up with joy and delight. Even though his master's words were grating on the ear, he realized that his master had at least said so many words to him. This was a rare occurrence that called for a celebration. He decided to treat himself to some wine when he returned home. With his spirits improved, Zhang Dafeng casually asked, "Can Senior Brother Li stop that person?" Before Old Man Yang could even reply and berate him, Zhang Dafeng had already slapped himself and answered, "Things will only become interesting if he loses. Otherwise, if Senior Brother Li truly stops him, I'll definitely be even more screwed in the future." "Zhang Dafeng, do you know why you're not successful?" Old Man Yang mysteriously asked. Zhang Dafeng faltered upon hearing this. He felt like there was a deeper meaning behind this question, so it was necessary for him to mull over it carefully. Unexpectedly, however, Old Man Yang answered for him, saying, "It's because you're ugly." Zhang Dafeng clasped his head in grief. As he stared at the splashing rain in the backyard, the middle-aged man felt like he was on the verge of tears. There was no need for the steward of the kiln supervision office to analyze the atmosphere to know that it wasn't suitable for him to stay any longer. He found a random excuse to take his leave. Chun Songfeng continued to search through the records. However, compared to his fear and diligence when Chan Dui had been present, he finally recovered some of his elegant and relaxed disposition as the descendant of a noble clan. The more this was the case, though, the more Lu Baqiao felt frustrated and stifled. His mind was full of grumblings that he wanted to spit out. However, being frank was one matter, while having a loose tongue was another matter. That being the case, Lu Baqiao felt like it was time to take a walk. Out of sight, out of mind. Chun Songfeng looked up and asked with a smile, "Baqiao, finally not able to sit here anymore?" Lu Baqiao had just started to stand up, yet he immediately sat back down after hearing this. "Hi, you're still in the mood to tease me? Seems like you're quite a tolerant person," he chuckled in frustration. Chun Songfeng put down the old record in his hands and said with a bitter expression, "I'm sorry you had to see me in such an embarrassing position. I wasn't ungrateful when you stood up for me just then. It's just that." Lu Baqiao wasn't someone who could tolerate listening to the complaints and plights of others, So he hurriedly waved his hands and said, "Please spare me. I was simply unable to stand your distant relatives' bullying of the weak and cowering to the strong. Also, I only criticized her because I was unable to control my tongue, so there's no need for you to thank me." Chen Songfeng leaned back and slowly rested on the back of the chair, exhaling softly as he did so. If they were in the Chen clan's residence in Dragontail County, this kind of lazy and uncouth sitting position would immediately draw punishment from the elders. Regardless of whether one was a legitimate or illegitimate child, all children would be subject to physical punishment if they dared to sit like this. Meanwhile, adults would receive a scolding. Scholars from powerful clans were often ridiculed by martial artists and referred to as sanctimonious and pretentious people. However, rules were rules, and descendants of these clans would be forced to walk this rigid path from birth. There was no exception, and this was the environment they would be raised in. Of course, there was also Southern Stream Nation, which was renowned for producing impractical and absurd scholars. These were scholars who were well known for their unrestrained speech and strict adherence to rules. "So, what's your actual relationship with Chen Dui?" Lu Baqiao asked. "Why are you so afraid of her? If this relates to a clan secret, then pretend that I didn't ask." Chen Songfeng stood up and walked over to shut the door. He returned and took a seat where the steward had been sitting just then, and he softly retorted. After several twists and turns, the porcelain buying right for Lu Xianyang's bonded porcelain has fallen into the hands of my clan. Are you not curious about why this is? Lu Baqiao nodded in reply. Perhaps the mountain-moving ape wouldn't be able to think of this possibility even if he racked his brains as hard as he could. The force that was vying for the sword scripture wasn't Sun-Scorched Mountain's mortal enemy Wind Lightning Field, but it was actually Dragontail County's Chen clan, a force that had seemingly arrived in this small town from nowhere. Chen Songfeng looked exhausted as he spoke, and this was most likely because he had been pent up this entire time. After all, those who thought about too much would naturally wind up with a tired mind. Now he was finally unable to endure anymore, so he was going to speak his mind to someone. Moreover, Lu Baqiao was someone whom he deeply trusted. Thus he slowly said, "Even though my clan does indeed have a better relationship with Wind Lightning Field, our clan strictly abides by our ancestral rules which state that we shouldn't become involved in the conflicts of other sects and clans. We've adhered to this rule for so many years already, so why would we suddenly break it for a sword scripture that's almost useless to our clan? Our Chen clan is a clan of scholars, not a clan of cultivators. So, what's the point of becoming involved in this?" Lu Baqiao mulled over this and he speculated. It's Chen Dui's clan that wants to obtain the sword scripture? Perhaps her clan is full of powerful but hidden swordsmen. Chen Songfeng shook his head and replied, "No, that's not the case. Steward Shui mentioned just then that there are two different Chen clans in this small town. Chen Dui belongs to the Chen clan that left long ago, and they left very comprehensively, not even staying in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. They moved directly to another continent. After many generations of growth and expansion, this Chen clan is now regarded as an archway that assembles the characteristics of all teachings. Of course, news of this hasn't spread around Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, and my clan in Dragontail County only knows about this because of our distant relationship with them. I reckon it's that woman blowing her own trumpet," Lu Baqiao sneered. "Is she trying to pick on me because she thinks I'm uneducated? Her clan is able to have a merit archway." Chen Songfeng put up two fingers. Lu Baqiao rolled his eyes and said, "Listen carefully. I'm talking about merit archways, not scholarly honor archways." Chen Songfeng didn't put down his fingers. Lu Baqiao was slightly disgruntled, and he was unwilling to yield as he continued to insist. "Then does her clan have an academy archway?" The so-called academy archways that Lu Baqiao spoke of were naturally the archways related to the 3 schools and 72 academies of Confucianism. He most definitely wasn't talking about the ordinary academies in mortal empires. In the vast Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, there were but 2 Confucian academies, Mountain Cliff Academy and Lakeview Academy. Chen Songfeng slowly put down one finger, leaving one raised. Lu Baqiao pretended that he was about to stand up, with his hands pushing down on the arms of his chair. There was mock fear on his face and he exclaimed, "Oh, then I should hurry up and apologize to that esteemed lady. My heavens!" With such a profound and powerful background, She even has the right to treat you as a slave, to say nothing of asking you to flip through a few records. Chen Songfeng replied with a smile. This was probably the reason for Lu Baqiao's charisma. This was something that should have been vexing and irritating, yet Lu Baqiao was able to say it in such a manner that wasn't infuriating at all. Lu Baqiao sat back down and wrapped his arms around his chest, appearing calm and composed as he said, "All right, I know that her background is terrifying now. You can continue." Chen Songfeng smiled and said, "In fact, Steward Shui already told us the answer." Lu Baqiao came to a sudden realization and he guessed. Lu Xianyang's ancestors were the graveyard attendants for Chen Duai's clan? Very perceptive of you, Chen Songfeng praised with a nod. Lu Baqiao frowned slightly and muttered, But how can this be? Didn't the traitor from Sun-Scorched Mountain create that sword scripture? Of course, he can also be regarded as one of the ancestors of Wind Lightning Field. Regardless, these timelines don't match, so how can the Lu clan have become the Chen clan's graveyard attendant? I can confirm that the Lu clan was indeed the graveyard attendant for the Chen clan in the very beginning, Chen Songfeng explained. As for the swordsman who took refuge in your Wind Lightning Field afterward, there are probably some secrets regarding why he eventually came to this small town and became a member of the Lu clan, even passing down the sword scripture. In any case, the Lu clan now has two family heirlooms, the sword scripture and the suit of armor. In terms of Chen Dui, she's actually not here to obtain treasures or anything. Instead, she's simply here to pay respect to her ancestors. Other than that, if the Lu clan still has any descendants, she'll also bring them back with her. The Chen clan will do everything they can to raise them, regardless of their talent. In some sense, this is their repayment to the Lu clan for attending to their ancestors' graveyard for so many years. Lu Baqiao was utterly perplexed. They're such a large and powerful clan, yet they only sent a single young girl over to pay respects to their ancestors? And she was almost punched to death by Song Chongjing as well. Chen Songfeng, I've read quite a few books, even though some of them are about things that happen under blankets, so I do indeed have some understanding of people and events. With what I know, I feel like she's definitely an imposter. Chen Songfeng shook his head, saying with a bitter laugh, "You weren't able to see just how respectful my grandfather was when he saw her." One shouldn't dwell on the shortcomings of their elders, so Chen Songfeng was truly unable to spit out the truth. He could only use the euphemistic description respectful to explain things. His clan had opened the middle gate for her, and the clan leader had more so bowed as deeply as he could to show his respect. The entire clan had treated her as a most esteemed guest, and during the welcome banquet, she had even enjoyed the honor of sitting in the host's seat. One could imagine just how much of a shock this was for Chen Songfeng. Wasn't Lu Xianyang almost smashed to death by the old ape? Lu Baqiao asked in puzzlement. Chen Songfeng sighed and answered, "You said it yourself, almost." Chen Songfeng stood up and walked to the window. The rain had eased up for the moment, yet looking up at the sky, it appeared like a downpour was imminently about to arrive. It seems like Master Ruan is an old acquaintance with one of Chen Dui's elders. They traveled around the world together in the past, and they can be regarded as good friends, Chen Songfeng said softly. So you're saying that Ruan Qiong is able to succeed Qi Jingchen and overlook this small world because he received some help from Chen Dui's clan? Lu Baqiao asked carefully. I didn't say anything, Chen Songfeng replied calmly. Lu Baqiao clicked his tongue in wonder. No wonder Chen Dui had been so tough and unyielding even when she had faced Song Chongjing, a powerful clan in the distance and the protection of a sage nearby. How could she not be arrogant? Why don't you tell me about bonded porcelains and porcelain buyers? Lu Baqiao suddenly said. I've always been fairly interested in this, and it's a shame that Wind Lightning Field has never taken a fancy to such things. It was only when I was forcefully dragged here by my master that I was able to learn a few things. Apparently, quite a few famous and powerful cultivators in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent have come from this small town. Chen Songfeng hesitated for a moment before deciding to answer honestly. It's quite similar to the mortal activity of stone gambling. Around 30 babies are born in the small town each year, and depending on their position, each of the 30 dragon kills will be assigned to a child as their porcelain. For example, if 32 children are born one year, then the 2 dragon kills occupying the top 2 positions will each be assigned 2 pieces of porcelain. If only 29 children are born the next year, then the dragon kiln in the bottom position won't receive anything for the year. Thus, people born in this small town will all have their own bonded porcelain. Right now, the fame of Chaoshi and Xieshe is unparalleled in the continent. One is a Taoist true lord who has the potential to become a heavenly lord, while one is a lone sword immortal who possesses remarkable power and might. Even though this small town is indeed capable of producing many powerful beings, the price of soaring to such a height is immense. Once these people, porcelain, advance to the middle 5 tiers, they'll lose the right to afterlife or reincarnation unless they manage to advance to the upper 5 tiers. If they fail, their soul and spirit will shatter and vanish. Even the Tao ancestor and Buddha will be unable to save them. Meanwhile, the porcelain buyers will also obtain the bonded porcelain that allows them to control the lives of these people. So what if they become as powerful as Chaoshi or Xieshe? This is a fate that they can't escape. Of course, if one manages to become as profoundly powerful as Chaoshi and Xieshe, the porcelain buyers will naturally feel the urge to treat them as esteemed guests. They wouldn't dare to act as haughty owners of the bonded porcelain anymore. After all, this is a mutually beneficial transaction, and any clan that has the support of Chaoshi and Xieshe will feel much safer. The reason for this is simple. When it comes to trivial matters, there naturally won't be a need to employ their help. When it comes to matters regarding the survival of their clan or sect, however, they'll definitely receive help from these powerful beings. Granted, these powerful beings can indeed refuse to help. However, their bonded porcelain will be smashed, and everyone will end up dying together. Lu Baqiao was astonished and amazed as he listened to this. It was no wonder the Greatly Empire had ferociously soared to such lofty heights in just a mere 200 to 300 years, becoming a powerful empire that controlled the entire northern stretches of the continent. Lu Baqiao was enthralled, and he sat down cross-legged and stroked his chin, asking, "I know that reaching 6 years of age for girls and 9 years of age for boys is a great hurdle for the people of this small town. This is similar to cultivation, where we're able to determine our future potential at that age. At that time, the porcelain buyers can come to the small town to bring with them those who have the potential to reach great heights. However, what about those who don't have potential? How do the dragon kills deal with the worthless bonded porcelain of those children? They'll be taken out of the dragon kills before being shattered and thrown away," Chun Songfeng replied softly. "There's a mountain of porcelain outside the small town, and this is the reason behind its existence." Lu Baqiao felt a slight hint of displeasure and he asked, "Then what happens to those children?" Chun Songfeng shook his head and replied, "I don't know. However, nothing good, I assume." Lu Baqiao sighed upon hearing this. He raised his hands and roughly massaged his cheeks. This was a secret transaction that the sages from the different forces had personally written the rules for, so it definitely wasn't something that a measly cultivator like him could challenge or interfere with. However, he still couldn't help but feel displeased. After a long period of silence, Lu Baqiao quietly remarked, "That being the case, everyone hailing from this small town is nothing but a helpless pawn. Who on the path of cultivation isn't?" Chun Songfeng asked. With sadness in his heart, Lu Baqiao nodded and concurred. Indeed, the door creaked as it was carefully opened, and a young boy in straw sandals carried a pale expression as he quietly tiptoed inside. He then turned around and lightly shut the door. Copying Old Man Yang, he also grabbed a small stool for himself and sat on the stairs. The raindrops were as large as peas, and the sky was as dark as midnight. For some reason, however, few drops of rain made it under the eaves even though it was absolutely pouring. The old man had been sitting here for a long time, yet there was only very little moisture on his sleeves. Chun Ping'an sat with his fingers intertwined as he quietly gazed at the small puddles in the backyard. Old Man Yang continued to smoke, with large puffs of smoke wafting into the surroundings. However, the clouds of smoke and the curtains of rain didn't try to invade each other's territory. It was as if an invisible barrier existed between them. One of the main reasons that Old Man Yang didn't dislike this child was because he would never scream or shout no matter the situation. This child would never disturb him, nor would he ever try to. In this sense, Chun Ping'an was quite similar to Li Er. Meanwhile, Zheng Dafeng was far inferior to them. "Grandpa Yang, thank you for your help all these years," Chun Ping'an said softly. Old Man Yang frowned and asked, "You're thanking me? If I remember correctly, I've never helped you for free before. Did you forget to pay one time? Chen Ping'an smiled in reply. This was just like how Old Man Yang had agreed to let him enter the mountains and pick medicinal herbs for the Yang family's medicine shop in the past. They would buy the medicinal herbs at a low price, yet they would also sell many of the pharmacy's medicinal herbs to him at a low price as well. This looked like a fair transaction, but Chen Ping'an was very aware that he was the one being helped. Moreover, just how much was a handmade smoking pipe worth? Meanwhile, the reason that Chen Ping'an was able to persevere for so many years and remain in good health was in large part thanks to the breathing technique that Old Man Yang had taught him. The old man looked up at the sky and sneered. When others offer the tiniest bit of help, some people feel an irresistible urge to treat them like a bodhisattva who has rescued them from the grips of calamity and death. This is especially the case when the help comes from a powerful person. These people will become especially grateful, so much so that they'll even be moved by their own acts of gratitude. They'll feel like they're people who understand the concept of repaying kindness, making them some kind of noble scholar, loyal official, or some brilliant disciple or what have you. They praise themselves as people who will be willing to sacrifice themselves for the sake of their benefactors. Bunch of ungrateful bastards. They should never have crawled out of their mother's wombs. Chen Ping'an scratched his head, an uneasy expression on his face. He didn't know if Old Man Yang was talking about him. The old man retracted his gaze and added coldly, "I'm not talking about you." Chen Ping'an suddenly saw a familiar figure at this moment, causing him to falter. There was a roof corridor behind the main hall, and a middle-aged scholar with graying sideburns held an umbrella in one hand and a stool in another hand as he walked out from the side door and made his way over. He placed the stool under the roof corridor and sat down, before leaning the oil paper umbrella against the stool and patting his knees with his hands. He sat upright as he smiled at the old man and young boy, and he said in a gentle voice, "Mountain Cliff Academy's Qi Jingchun pays his respects to Mr. Yang." His shoes were soaking wet and covered in mud thanks to the pouring rain, and the bottom of his robes wasn't able to escape this fate either. Old Man Yang was relaxed and carefree as he pointed at the sage with his smoking pipe and said, "I already knew that you would be unsuccessful on the first day that you arrived here. However, I haven't heard a single word of complaint from you after all these years. How very strange. In any case, you don't seem like a meek or submissive person, so even though the outside forces are slightly baffled by your wild actions, I'm not surprised by them at all." Qi Jingchun patted his belly and said with a faint smile, "Of course I have complaints. In fact, my entire belly is filled with complaints. It's just that I haven't voiced them." Old Man Yang thought for a moment before remarking, "I'm not sure about your abilities, but the fact that your master dared to say those 4 words, in my eyes, he can be regarded as this." The old man raised a thumb. Qi Jingchun smiled bitterly and stated, "Master's knowledge is actually even greater than that." Old Man Yang sneered and said, "Well, it's not like I'm a scholar, so I won't praise your master even if his knowledge has already surpassed Confucius. Mr. Yang, you feel like master's 4 words were correct?" Qi Jingchun asked with a serious expression. Old Man Yang laughed and replied, "I didn't feel like it was correct. It was just that all Confucian students used to believe in the previous 4 words, and that annoyed me quite a bit. The fact that someone stepped forward to oppose them made me feel quite good. That's all there is to it. You scholars setting up an arena and fighting until your decorum is no more brings me great joy." Qi Jingchun couldn't help but chuckle. He was just about to speak, yet Old Man Yang had already waved his hands, understanding what he was about to say. "There's no need for polite words. I don't like listening to them, and we're not people with the same aspirations either. This has been the case for generations, so there's no need for you to break the tradition. Moreover, you're already akin to a rat who everyone's trying to beat, so I naturally wouldn't dare to get too close to you anyway." Qi Jingchun nodded in reply. He stood up and gestured for Chen Ping'an to come over, saying, "I used the snake gall pebbles that you gave me to carve 2 seals. One's engraved using the official script, and one's engraved using Oracle Bone script. Here, take them." Chen Ping'an ran through the rain and the pond-like backyard. Standing before Qi Jingchun, he accepted the white cloth pouch. Qi Jingchun smiled faintly and said, "Remember to keep them safe. If you see paintings or calligraphy scrolls that you like in the future, for example a spirited painting of mountains and rivers, you can stamp them using these seals. Okay. Chen Ping'an nodded and replied in a daze. Old Man Yang glanced at the pouch in Chen Ping'an's hands and asked, "Where's the character Spring? I engraved another seal a while ago, and I gave it to a child from the Zhao clan." Qi Jingchun replied with a smile. "Qi Jingchun, are you a charity?" The old man chuckled. Qi Jingchun didn't take the old man's teasing words to heart. He bade them farewell and took his leave. Seeing Chen Ping'an still standing there like a wooden column, Old Man Yang chuckled in frustration, scolding, "After receiving a gift from someone, you're just going to skip home and indulge in happiness by yourself? You're not going to accompany Mr. Qi for a bit and see him off." Chen Ping'an hurriedly ran to the back door of the main hall. "Bring the umbrella with you," the old man scolded with a smile. "With the condition you're in right now, can you still endure such lashing rain and wind?" Chen Ping'an borrowed an umbrella from a shop assistant before hurrying over to accompany Mr. Qi. They walked side by side on the main street. Old Man Yang remained sitting under the eave the entire time, taking the occasional puff from his smoking pipe. Smoke billowed around him. Even though the two seals had still been in the pouch, Old Man Yang had noticed something special about them. It was because of this that he had asked about the character Spring. The human heart was filled with grandeur. After a short while, Chen Ping'an returned to the backyard. What did he say in the end? Old Man Yang asked. Chen Ping'an sighed as he sat back down on the small stool, replying, "Mr. Qi said that virtuous people can be deceived through means within reason." Old Man Yang was slightly annoyed as he grumbled, "Those old geezers who are honored in the temples have their brains short-circuited or something. Someone is clearly targeting Mountain Cliff Academy and Qi Jingchun. Yet they're still standing on the sidelines with their hands clasped behind their backs? Do they genuinely believe that they're inanimate objects carved from wood and shaped from clay?" Chen Ping'an didn't hear him clearly, so he asked, "Grandpa Yang, did you say something?" The old man remained silent. "Heh, so this is a man who's willing to become a virtuous person but not a sage." Ning Yao slowly woke up from her sweet and comfortable nap. After opening her eyes, she was slightly baffled to find that she was sitting on a chair. After faltering for a brief moment, she stood up and walked over to open the door, only to find an old man and a young boy sitting outside. The two of them were both silent, being the untalkative people that they were. After hearing Ning Yao's footsteps, Chen Ping'an turned around and said with a smile, "Oh, you're awake. You were sleeping quite soundly before, so I decided not to wake you up." Ning Yao nodded in reply, not paying too much attention to this. She turned to the old man and said, "Senior Yang, what, you're afraid that Chen Ping'an took advantage of you while you were sleeping?" The old man huffed. "Don't worry, I helped you keep an eye on him the entire time. He dared to dream, but he didn't dare to act. Ning Yao, don't listen to Grandpa Yang's nonsense. I guarantee that I didn't dream about it either," Chen Ping'an hurriedly explained. Ning Yao took a deep breath and told herself that mighty people should be tolerant and magnanimous. Old Man Yang shot a sideways glance at the young boy and chuckled at his misfortune, saying, "How naive and clueless." The rain had already subsided, and Old Man Yang said frankly, "When you go home, remember to bring the pouch of offering coins over. That will be the payment for you and the young girl's medicine." Ning Yao frowned and said, "What kind of medicine does the Yang family's medicine shop sell? How is it so expensive? When someone is about to die from hunger, how much is the steamed bun in my hand worth?" Old Man Yang asked calmly. "This is profiting off other people's misfortune," Ning Yao replied solemnly. The old man was a heavy smoker, and the entire top half of his body was enveloped in a thin cloud of smoke. From within this sea of clouds, his cold and hoarse voice traveled over, stating, "Unreasonably raising prices is something that only lowly merchants do. It's not something that I would do. My rule is to stand by my words. I only offer a single price, and it's up to you whether you want to buy it or not." Ning Yao still wanted to speak, but she discovered that Chen Ping'an was tugging her sleeves and secretly blinking at her. In the end, she could only swallow her words in frustration. The medicinal herbs produced in this small world were indeed of top quality. However, referred to as the jewel small world of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, this small world had never been renowned for its medicinal herbs or ingredients. Instead, it was widely known for its porcelain, treasures, and fated opportunities. Thus, even a mountain of medicinal ingredients wouldn't be worth a few gold essence copper coins. Old Man Yang gestured with his smoking pipe and said, "The rain has stopped, so you two can stop making eyes at each other in front of me as well. Have you two no shame?" Chen Ping'an grabbed Ning Yao's arm and dragged her down the stairs. After leaving the pharmacy and arriving on the main street, Chen Ping'an smiled and asked, "Are you feeling puzzled? Don't worry, this is just how Grandpa Yang is. He doesn't like to give or accept favors, and everything that he does is very fair." "Yes, that's right, fair." Ning Yao chuckled coldly and said, "Fair? Everyone has a scale in their heart. What right does he have to think that he's the judge of fairness? Because of his age." Chen Ping'an shook his head, saying, "I don't feel like I'm being tricked if I pay him a pouch of copper coins." Ning Yao glanced at him and stated, "If you can still put your hand on your heart and say this after living in the outside world for 10 years, then you win." "Then we'll talk about it then," Chen Ping'an replied with a smile. Ning Yao sighed in exasperation. She was truly unable to speak any reason into him. "Where are we headed now?" Chen Ping'an thought for a moment before replying, "Let's go to the blacksmith shop to see how Lu Xianying's doing. While we're heading over, we can also retrieve your saber from the ground." "Then lead the way," Ning Yao resolutely said. "Is your body holding up all right?" she suddenly asked. Chen Ping'an cracked a grin and replied, "There's no major issue. However, in addition to practicing the fist technique, I'll also have to drink medicine like you do every day. Grandpa Yang also said that if the medicine isn't effective, I might need to spend even more money." "You genuinely believe him?" Ning Yao asked with a puzzled expression. Chen Ping'an smiled and shook his head. It was as if he couldn't be bothered arguing with her about this. After leaving the small town, he rolled up his sleeves and unstrapped the skirt dagger, returning it to Ning Yao. After concealing her skirt dagger, Ning Yao went over to retrieve her saber, which had been trodden into the ground by the mountain-moving ape. As for the sword scabbard that she had given Chen Ping'an, he had decided to temporarily leave it with her. It was hanging by her waist right now, and this gave the flying sword a place to stay. When Chen Ping'an and Ning Yao arrived on the southern end of the covered bridge, they saw a girl with a ponytail and dressed in green sitting on top of the stairs, with her hands on her cheeks as she gazed into the distance. She was sitting with her back facing them. Alone in the backyard of the Yang family's medicine shop, Old Man Yang put away his smoking pipe and waved his hand, dispelling the cloud of smoke around him. "Rest assured, I'll grant you the indestructible body of a river guardian when you succeed. As for whether you can become a genuine river god or not, that will be up to your own abilities and fortune." In the end, he lightly tapped the ground using his smoking pipe, and he looked up in the direction of the old locust tree. He clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "A tree falls and the monkeys scatter." 3 horse-drawn carriages trundled toward Clay Vase Alley. Song Chongjing was truly unable to fathom why his nephew insisted on keeping up a rivalry with an impoverished young boy from this impoverished little alley. In fact, he had even developed a knot in his heart because of this. Song Chongjing smiled and said, "Since I've already interfered with your muddle-headed rivalry with Chen Ping'an once, I'm not going to interfere with it a second time. You need to resolve the situation yourself. In the end," he warned, "you're allowed to have a private relationship with Sunscorch Mountain, but remember not to become overly involved with them." Song Jisun was amused and he asked, "Private relationship? Are you referring to that little girl?" "Haha, I merely found it a little fun. There's no relationship to speak of. It was merely fun. So you decided to casually give her a sword-nurturing gourd?" Song Chongjing chuckled. Song Jisun huffed and remained silent. The carriages couldn't enter the small alley, nor did Song Chongjing want to disembark to enter. Thus, Song Jisun jumped off the carriage alone. He discovered that it was raining, though this was only a light spring drizzle. However, it was showing an inclination of becoming a downpour. He hurriedly ran into Clay Vase Alley and entered his courtyard. What greeted him was the sight of Ji Gui sitting under the eaves of the house and daydreaming. Song Jisun smiled and shouted, "Let's go. Your young master is going to take you to the Greatly Empire's capital to broaden your horizons." Ji Gui came to her senses and she asked, "Huh? We're going to leave so soon?" Song Jisun nodded and said, "Everything has been packed already, so I don't see why not. There are 2 large suitcases in my room, and there's also your small suitcase. We've already packed everything that we can pack and want to pack. There's nothing left over in the house, So what difference does it make if we leave earlier or later? Zhigui rested her chin on her knees and said sadly, "Yeah, this place is our house." Song Jisun sighed and walked over to sit down on the doorstep next to her. He wiped away the rainwater on his forehead and asked in a gentle voice, "What's wrong? Reluctant to leave? If you truly miss this place, then we can leave a little later. That's no issue. I can notify the others." Zhigui suddenly smiled, vigorously waving her dainty fist and saying, "No need. Let's leave straight away. Who's afraid of who? Don't forget that four-legged snake," Song Jisun reminded her. Zhigui was instantly enraged and she huffed, "That stupid little fool. It secretly snuck into the bottom of my suitcase yesterday, and it made me spend half the day looking for it. When I finally found it after a long struggle, I discovered that some of my makeup boxes had become absolutely filthy. Truly unforgivable. It deserves a death sentence." Song Jisun started to become a little worried for the four-legged snake, and he asked tentatively, "That stupid little thing wasn't killed by you, right?" Zhigui shook her head and replied, "No, I decided to spare it for the moment. I'll deal with it when we reach the capital." "Oh, that's right. Let's raise a few more chickens when we reach the capital, young master. Is that okay? We need to raise at least 5. Song Jisun was baffled and he asked, "There'll be enough eggs to eat, so why do we still need to buy and raise chickens? Aren't you always complaining about them being too noisy? When the time comes, I'm going to tie a string to a foot of each chicken. I'll then tie the other ends to that stupid little thing's 4 legs and head. When I'm unhappy, I can go and shoo the chickens. Otherwise, that stupid little thing is quite quick and evasive. I get exhausted chasing it all the time, and that only makes me angrier." Listening to his maidservants grumbling, Song Jisun's mind was filled with the image of that 4-legged snake being punished. Isn't that punishment by being dismembered by 5 horses? Oh, that's not right. It's dismemberment by 5 chickens. Song Jisun held his belly and roared with laughter. Zhigui was accustomed to her young master's wild imagination, so she didn't find this strange in the least. She simply asked, "Young master, the suitcases are so heavy, so how are we going to carry them? Also, there are quite some things that we should have thrown out but haven't thrown out yet." Song Jisun stood up, snapping his fingers and ordering, "Come out. I know you guys are hiding nearby. Please carry these suitcases to the carriages for us." There was no reply. Song Jisun fell silent for a long while. His expression became increasingly dark and he commanded, "Show yourselves. Do you believe me when I say that I'll get my uncle to personally carry them instead?" A short moment later, several hidden figures either jumped down from the roof on the opposite side of Clay Vase Alley or appeared from elsewhere in the alley. There were 5 black-clad guards in total, and after the leader opened the door, all of them funneled into the courtyard. The leader hesitated for a moment before cupping his fists in respect and saying in a gloomy voice, "We were carrying out a mission before, so we didn't dare to show ourselves without permission. Please forgive us, Your Highness." "Go do your job," Song Jisun said expressionlessly. The person's head remained lowered and he said, "This underling beseeches Your Highness to please help explain this situation to the monarch." Song Jisun was annoyed by his nagging and he scolded, "Will my uncle fuss over such trivial matters with you people?" The 5 people remained completely still, standing in the rain and refusing to budge a single step. Song Jisun had no option but to yield, conceding, "All right, I'll help you guys explain." Only after hearing this did the 5 people enter the house. 3 of them easily carried a suitcase each, while 2 of them were empty-handed as they guarded the front and the rear. After slowly walking into Clay Vase Alley, they immediately broke into a sprint. Song Jisun watched on in thought. Zhigui opened up an oil paper umbrella and handed Song Jisun a slightly larger one. After locking the house door, the outside kitchen door, and the courtyard door, the 2 of them stood outside the gate with an umbrella each in their hands. Song Jisun looked at the couplets and the door gods and softly murmured, "I wonder if we'll be able to see these couplets the next time we return. Since we're leaving for good, no? Why would we return again?" Zhigui asked. "I guess you're right. If we become successful, there'll be no one we can show off to. But if we end up unsuccessful, there'll be heaps of people waiting to laugh at us," Song Jisun said with a self-deprecating smile. The rain was incessant, and the small alley gradually became wet and muddy. Zhigui was unwilling to stay any longer and she urged, "Let's go, let's go." Song Jisun nodded, and the two of them made their way out of Clay Vase Alley. Zhigui walked in front, with her footsteps relatively hurried. Meanwhile, Song Jisun walked behind her, with his footsteps comparatively slow. When he walked past a certain gate, Song Jisun stopped in his tracks and turned around to look back. He was seemingly in a daze as he stared at the ordinary mud wall. Zhigui turned around and couldn't help but grumble, "Young master, the rain is going to become heavier if we don't hurry." Song Jisun's expression was hidden under his umbrella. After raising an arm and completing some action, he answered Zhigui's call and finally started to walk quicker than a carriage outside Clay Vase Alley. Song Chongjing was sitting with his eyes closed and resting his mind. The Kiln Supervision Office would write up a secret document each day, and this was the responsibility of 9 top-notch guards and spies from the Great Li Empire. They were responsible for making the observations, and what they recorded was the daily activities of the illegitimate son of the previous Kiln Supervision official. For example, what streets he shopped in with his maidservant Zhigui, how much money he spent on what food, what passages he recited in the morning and which sages' works these came from, when he secretly drank for the first time, who he flew kites and catch crickets with outside the small town, who he argued with and why, and so on and so forth. Regardless of how big or small the events were, everything was observed and recorded. These records would then be delivered to the capital, where they would be taken into the palace and placed on the desk in the royal study. In the end, these records would be gathered together and bound into a book. His older brother, someone who loved to toy around with words and essays, personally named these books the Small Records of Daily Life. From Small Records of Daily Life 1 to Small Records of Daily Life 15, everything that the 15-year-old boy living in the impoverished alley had done in his life had been recorded into 15 books. Before coming to the small town, Song Chongjing had flicked through these boring records of his nephew's life. However, he had astutely noticed that a page was missing from the 12th record, and it was more so clear that it had been purposely torn out by someone. This most likely signified that a huge event had taken place when Song Jisun was 12 years old. Song Chongjing had initially thought that this was a bloody assassination attempt that had been ordered by someone in the capital. Moreover, the culprit had been so powerful that even Song Jisun's brother could only remain silent. Only later did Song Chongjing realize that this wasn't the case. Instead, that page most likely recorded something that was a bad memory for Song Jisun. Moreover, it was definitely related to Clay Vase Alley's Chunpingen. Song Chongjing started to organize his thoughts. He rarely had time to rest, and he seized this opportunity to carefully mull over the recorded conversations between the two youths, as well as what the situation would have looked like during these conversations. Song Chongjing opened his eyes and pulled back the curtain in the carriage. He saw the slender figure of the maidservant holding an umbrella first, and then he saw the figure of his nephew behind her. The two of them walked toward the second carriage. Meanwhile, their suitcases had already been placed in the last carriage. "It's time to leave," Song Chongjing said softly. His carriage slowly trundled forward. However, it suddenly ground to a halt, and after a short while, a flustered and angry Song Jisun charged into the carriage, shouting, "What's the meaning of this? Are you referring to the 2 corpses in your carriage?" Song Chongjing asked. Song Jisun was livid as he angrily stared at Song Chongjing. Song Chongjing's expression was calm, and he explained, "Do you know their identity? There are 7 intelligence agencies in the Great Li Empire, and 3 of them are under my control. Their main tasks are to infiltrate the official courts of other nations and empires, gather information about their military, and bribe their officials and generals. The Imperial Preceptor Embroidered Tiger controls another 3 intelligence agencies, and their main task is to keep an eye on the discourse happening within the empire, most notably in the official court and in the mortal world. They especially have to keep a keen eye on the capital. The final intelligence agency targets cultivators, and they listen to the commands of someone. There are a total of 9 spies in this small town, and they come from each of these 7 different intelligence agencies. Their task is to guarantee your safety and ensure that nothing untoward happens to you. What are you trying to say?" Song Jisun asked in a solemn voice. Song Chongjing smiled and replied, "There are many twists and turns, and in terms of who that person is actually loyal to, there are a bunch of messy explanations and half-truths. If you want me to explain this to you, I'd say that it's quite difficult. In any case, that person deserved to die. However, you need to remember this. The others all view you as a prince of the greatly empire now, and they all regard you as a lofty royal descendant. On the surface, they might respect you, revere you, or act obsequiously in front of you. You can naturally accept all of this. However, never forget why these people are acting in such a manner. Oh, why is that? Song Jisun asked with a cold chuckle. Song Changjing smiled faintly and replied, "Do you think that you're genuinely important or something? This is all because I'm accompanying you right now. I'm scared that you'll forget this, so I seized this opportunity to teach you a small lesson. Staying in the same carriage as a dead person is very uncomfortable. However, this is still better than me having to sit next to your corpse the next time we meet." Song Jisun's face flushed beet red. Song Changjing glanced at him and said coldly, "You can leave now." Song Jisun instantly swallowed the words that had already been on the tip of his tongue. He quietly turned around, gritting his teeth as he left in anger. After Song Jisun left, Song Changjing smiled and mused, "With such meager abilities, will those toothless tigers and foxes not immediately set their eyes on you when you arrive in the capital? Will they not want to tear a few chunks of flesh from your body?" In fact, Song Changjing also felt a slight headache when he thought about returning to the capital. Inside the carriage, it was surprisingly the corpse that took up the most space. Song Jisun was extremely uncomfortable, and it was instead Zhuhou who wore a calm and composed expression. "Oh, that's right. Zhuhou, did you bring our old house keys with you?" Song Jisun asked in a casual manner. Zhuhou wore a puzzled expression as she replied, "No, I just left them somewhere in the house. It's not like I want to return anyway. What's wrong? Why are you asking about this, young master? In any case, don't you have a set of keys as well?" "Oh, I also left them in the house," Song Jisun replied with a smile. The three carriages passed the old locust tree, exited the small town, and eventually made their way onto a muddy and uneven road. They continued to trundle toward the east. When the three carriages had exited the eastern gate of the small town, the gatekeeper Zheng Dafeng had been observing them from the shelter of his mud hut. Squatting by the door and with his hands in the opposite sleeves, the unmarried man had yawned as he watched them leave the town. After traveling for around an hour, Song Changjing suddenly ordered in a grave voice, "Stop!" Song Changjing disembarked his carriage, while Song Jisun and Zhuhou pulled back the curtain in their carriage and stuck their heads out together. They looked toward Song Changjing in curiosity. Song Changjing waved his hand, and Song Jisun immediately shrunk back into his carriage, dragging Zhuhou along with him. Song Changjing walked forward, and not far in front of him, there stood an unremarkable middle-aged man blocking the path. He looked like an honest person, and his straw sandals and pant legs were all covered in mud. As he walked over, Song Changjing smiled and remarked, "Who would have thought? There's actually someone like you hidden in the small town. By the looks of it, the intelligence officers of the Greatly Empire truly live off shit instead of rice." Song Changjing's snow-white robe had initially been spotless, yet at this moment, they also became covered in water and mud. His shoes naturally weren't spared either. In the end, Song Changjing stopped 10 paces away from the middle-aged man. "Since you didn't attack me right away, why don't you tell me what your end goal is?" The roof of the middle-aged man's house had been damaged by the mountain-moving ape, yet facing the monarch of the Greatly Empire, what part of him still looked like the pathetic and useless man who had been squatting on the ground and fuming in silence? "Song Changjing, you'll naturally know the answer if you can survive this battle," Li Er said in a solemn voice. Song Changjing frowned in reply. Li Er understood his worry and he said, "I'll let the carriages pass first." Song Changjing nodded with a smile. He didn't turn around and he kept his eyes fixed on Li Er as he shouted, "You guys leave first. Keep going forward." Li Er stepped aside and allowed the three carriages to pass without any obstructions. Only after the carriages completely disappeared from sight did Song Changjing turn his attention to the patiently waiting Li Er. This person's cultivation base could only be higher than his own. However, the gap between them was limited. Song Changjing was unafraid, and was instead filled with a fighting spirit. Ardor and zeal coursed through his blood as he tugged at his collar. Even though the person standing in front of him wasn't renowned, he was definitely a top-notch whetstone to refine his practice of the martial arts. Song Changjing's instinct told him that everything depended on this one moment, whether he lived or died, and whether he was at the 9th tier or 10th tier tomorrow. The rain gradually subsided as Ning Yao and Chan Ping'an walked along the street. Ning Yao turned around to look at Chan Ping'an, whose breathing was now calm and expression was now relaxed. Even though she disliked Old Man Yang, she had to admit that he was indeed a skillful person who was living in recluse. Old Man Yang isn't an ordinary person. Ning Yao paused for a brief moment, looking back at the unremarkable Yang family's medicine shop. The light drizzle was fine and glistening, and it caused the outline of the medicine shop to become fuzzy and misty. Ning Yao corrected herself, murmuring, "Old Man Yang is an extraordinary person." Chan Ping'an couldn't tell the difference between the two remarks. He simply replied with a nod before smiling and asking, "In the past, I only thought that Grandpa Yang was a very good person. He was always very fair. Only now do I realize that Grandpa Yang is actually much more skillful and knowledgeable than he lets on." "Ning Yao, you can also be regarded as a cultivator, right?" Ning Yao replied with a remark that Chan Ping'an couldn't really understand. "Something similar but not exactly the same. However, it makes no difference to you." After surviving a great calamity, Chan Ping'an's state of mind was completely different as he arrived on the southern end of the covered bridge and visited the young girl in green again. When Ruan Xiu heard the footsteps behind her, she stood up with a bashful smile and turned around to look at Chan Ping'an and Ning Yao, who were standing side by side. Ruan Xiu felt a little self-conscious and uneasy at the moment. Meanwhile, Chan Ping'an didn't dare to treat Ruan Xiu as an ordinary girl anymore. Of course, his strongest impression of her was still the fact that she could defeat an entire mountain of food. Ruan Xiu glanced at the cold and gallant-appearing Ning Yao, and didn't dare to say hello. Ning Yao also shot a glance at the slender and pretty Ruan Xiu, and she didn't really want to greet her either. The three of them walked down the stairs of the covered bridge, and Chan Ping'an said in a soft voice, "I heard Mr. Qi say that Lu Xianying is doing okay now." Ruan Xiu nodded earnestly, explaining, Yes, he's woken up now." When the shopkeeper of the Yang family's medicine shop saw him, he remarked that this was the god of the underworld showing mercy and allowing Lu Xianying to go free. It was only because of this that he was able to survive. The shopkeeper also said that since he's awake, there won't be any major issues after this. "I was afraid that you'd be anxious, so I wanted to visit you and tell you this news straight away. However, Father won't allow me to cross the covered bridge." Ruan Xiu continued to recount the events, and she was as talkative as a chirping siskin resting on the branches. When she finished speaking, there was a slightly apologetic expression on her face. In fact, there were some things that Ruan Xiu didn't tell them. For example, when Lu Xianying had woken up, she had immediately dashed out of the door and ran to the covered bridge. All she could think of was telling Chan Ping'an this good news, and she even forgot about her father's warning that she wasn't allowed to enter the small town. Just as she had been about to run down the covered bridge from the stairs on the northern end, however, her elusive father, who came and went without warning, had suddenly appeared and dragged her back by the ear. Only after a lot of convincing did her father allow her to wait for Chan Ping'an on the northern steps of the covered bridge. This wasn't a case of awakening adolescent love, nor was it a case of deep affection toward someone. Instead, this was simply a case of kindness from the bottom of her heart. Of course, the prerequisite to receiving this kindness was the fact that Ruan Xiu didn't dislike Chan Ping'an. Not only that, but she even had a fairly good impression of him. In other words, she approved of Chan Ping'an. The reason for this was simple. When the two of them had first met on the Azure Cow Ridge, Chan Ping'an had been willing to dive into the pool to catch fish for her. Afterward, he hadn't felt any regret, even though the wound on his left hand had caused him to gasp in extreme pain. When Lu Xianying had almost died at the hands of Bai Yuan, Chan Ping'an had also been willing to step forward and charge into battle. All these little things accumulated together to bring fortune to Chan Ping'an. In fact, Chan Ping'an had always been this kind of person. This was his belief. It was just that Ruan Xiu had coincidentally seen him in action. However, Chan Ping'an had actually let slip even more opportunities. For example, the golden carp in the fish basket, the catfish that he had given Gu Kan, the four-legged snake, the locust leaves that had fluttered in front of him, and so on. All of these fated opportunities had flashed before his eyes, yet they wouldn't voluntarily land in his hands simply because he was a person who cherished everything that he had. Chunping and Ruanxiu and Ningyao walked down the covered bridge. However, none of them noticed the beads of water silently falling into the creek from varying heights. Some of these beads had been hanging on the eaves of the bridge roof, while others had been resting on the railings that ran across the bridge. There were also those which had been residing in the potholes along the edges of the covered bridge. These beads of water had come from various different locations. In the end, however, they had all fallen into the creek and become one with the creek. At the same time, the Yang family's medicine shop was riddled with puddles. The backyard had almost become a pond, with rippling water covering a large swathe of the land. Under this water was a muddy mess, just like the other backyards in the world. Above this rippling pond, there stood a blurry figure that was shrouded in mist and vapor. One could vaguely discern that this was a hunchbacked old lady. Old Man Yang wasn't surprised, and he took a puff from his smoking pipe as he asked, "Did you observe anything interesting?" The blurry figure involuntarily swayed with the water like a water weed, and she replied in a hoarse voice, "That little girl is the daughter of the next sage, after all, so just how lofty and noble is her status? Why does she insist on becoming friends with that impoverished boy? That's all." Old Man Yang sneered. The old woman trembled, and she didn't dare to reply. "Since you've already reached this stage, there are some rules that I should make clear to you, lest you die in the future and not know the cause, perhaps even feeling like you've been wronged," Old Man Yang slowly said. As if organizing his thoughts, Old Man Yang didn't immediately continue. When the rain stopped, the puddles in the yard started to slowly recede, causing the old woman's body to become increasingly blurry. "Great Immortal, I just want to see my grandson more," she said in a pitiful voice. Her words interrupted Old Man Yang's train of thought, and he snapped in slight irritation, "What you want is your own matter to deal with. I don't have time to deal with your wishes." His gaze became distant when he said this, and he murmured to himself, "You can count yourself lucky. If you had fallen into the hands of the three teachings, it's hard to say whether you would even have an afterlife or next life. How could you enjoy your current privilege?" Buddhism has the concept of vanquishing a distracted and restless mind, with the concepts of desires and vows being critically important. Confucianism is slightly more relaxed, and it isn't as broadly controlling as Buddhism. They simply pass on their teachings in an earnest manner, warning their disciples to remain morally vigilant even when alone. In other words, there is a focus on being true to one's words. As for Taoism, they elevate the concept of how to think even further, going as far as to view internal demons as the nemesis to cultivation. They're even stricter than Buddhism, leading many people to wander onto stray paths. As a result, there are many so-called heretical sections. Because Taoists pursue tranquility and focus on examining one's own conscience, it's extremely easy for one's mind to become a tangled mess if one becomes stuck when trying to understand the Confucian sage's questions. With smoke billowing around him, Old Man Yao appeared much like a dragon hidden in a sea of clouds. The old woman was more so perplexed after hearing his explanation, especially since she had grown up in the small town and had never gone to school before. As such, she naturally couldn't understand these profound and mysterious concepts. The only thing she could do was try her best to memorize Old Man Yao's words. Old Man Yang suddenly smiled and said, "Oh, you don't need to remember all this. After all, this isn't what we're going to focus on." The old woman was dumbfounded. "We don't care about what you think. We only care about how you perform," Old Man Yang repeated. "Great Immortal, I understand," the old woman said with an uneasy expression. Old Man Yang pursed his lips and continued, "Since you're a river guardian now, you naturally need to be responsible for all the things that happen in your river. This is not only to accumulate hidden virtue, one, but also to obtain prayers and incense from the common people in the surrounding land. If you're able to perform well and have someone build a temple and cast a golden statue for you, you'll be able to house a wisp of your spirit there to enjoy the people's worship. That will be up to your own ability. Afterward, you'll need to strive to have the imperial court acknowledge and accept you, and that will allow you to enter the official genealogical records of the empire. You'll be recognized as an official guardian of the mountains or waters. Failing this, however, you need to strive to at least enter the local county chronicles. Otherwise, if your temple is categorized as an illegal one and demolished along with your golden statue, your days will become much tougher than they are now. You'll suffer even more than lonely spirits and wandering ghosts." The old woman mustered her courage and asked, "Great immortal, you said just then that our small town is a fully restricted area. If that's the case, then apart from extending my lifespan, what else can a measly river guardian like me do? Also, in terms of building a temple and obtaining incense, genealogical records, and local county chronicles or whatnot." That was the situation in the past. However, it's hard to say what it will be like in the future. Not far into the future, this place will be relegated from a small world into a blessed land with no restrictions to enter. Anyone will be able to enter, and they won't need to offer 3 pouches of copper coins anymore. This is also why the emperor of the Great Li Empire is acting in such an unscrupulous manner. There are some things that will lead to vastly different outcomes depending on whether they're acted on 60 years earlier or 60 years later, Old Man Yang explained. The old woman gritted her teeth and asked, "Great immortal, are you only willing to protect me because of my grandson?" Old Man Yang nodded in reply. He didn't try to hide his intentions. "If that's the case, then why did you allow the swordsman from True Martial Mountain to take Ma Kuxuan with him? Why didn't you teach my grandson yourself?" she asked. As it turned out, this old woman who had transformed into a river guardian was none other than Granny Ma, the old woman from Apricot Blossom Alley who had been slapped to death. Old Man Yang lightly tapped his smoking pipe, causing the projection above the water to instantly contort and shudder. This projection was created by Granny Ma's soul, so Old Man Yang's action immediately caused her to wail in anguish. This pain had arrived suddenly with no warning, and it was akin to a mortal suddenly experiencing a bone-piercing pain that was seemingly going to tear their heart and chest apart. How could Granny Ma endure this? Even though I don't differentiate between good and bad or just and evil, nor do I use these to measure one's hidden virtues, this doesn't mean that I approve of your actions, Old Man Yang told her in an indifferent voice. In the past, the time wasn't right for me to fuss over these things. In the future, however, I can wipe out your existence with just a single thought. So don't try to push your luck. Granny Ma fell to her knees and begged for forgiveness, exclaiming, "Great immortal, I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare." At that time, the swordsman from True Martial Mountain had paid a huge price to summon the true god to help them. When Ma Kuxuan had disrespectfully questioned the true god, even the military and swordsman had felt a deep sense of apprehension, afraid that the true god would unleash divine punishment. In the end, however, why had the true god patiently answered Ma Kuxuan's question? In fact, why had he replied in human tongue saying, "It's not that I don't want to, it's simply that I'm unable to"? This was clearly an exchange that should have never occurred between a human and a god. However, perhaps even the transcendent swordsman hadn't been aware of the true reason behind this. He had most likely dismissed this as the true god having considerations and rules of his own. However, Old Man Yang was well aware of why this was. Ma Kuxuan, that young boy, had the mandate of heaven. He was no inferior to the maidservant Jigui, Wangjuwang. Combining the two characters together, the character Pearl was formed. When it came to true dragons, which part of them was the most precious? Their pearl. Why had Jigui chosen to attach herself to Song Jisen, the prince of the Great Li Empire? Emperors always liked to refer to themselves as true dragons, and their fortune was directly linked to the fortune of their empire and throne. Thus, it was abundantly clear that the partnership between Song Jisen and Jigui would be a complementary relationship between two powerful individuals. Taking a step back, however, one had to realize that the path of cultivation was a long one. Fortune, talent, aptitude, fated opportunities, and a mature temperament were all critical aspects that couldn't be missing. Even so, there were those who would lead from the beginning and end up leading throughout, while there were also those who would accumulate for a long time before suddenly soaring to great heights. When it came to cultivation, nothing was set in stone. Looking at the current generation of children in the small town, apart from Ma Kuxuan and Jigui, Song Jisen, Zhaoyao, Guqin, Ruanxiu, Lu Xianying, and a few other children who had good fated opportunities and destinies were all supreme prodigies. Even with his profound and hidden knowledge, Old Man Yang didn't dare to say whose success would be greater than whom in the future. He shot a glance at the puddle in the yard and said, "You can leave now. For the moment, you only need to keep an eye on the area around the covered bridge." Granny Ma was terrified and she stammered, "Great immortal, even I don't dare to get too close to the covered bridge, especially the deep pool under it. Each time I approach that area, It's as if I'm being cooked in boiling oil." Old Man Yang smiled and replied, "You don't need to enter that area. You simply need to keep your eyes open and observe the covered bridge. For example, if something flies out from underneath the covered bridge one day, just take note of what direction it leaves in." Granny Ma hurriedly accepted this command and took her leave. Her flickering and vapor-like figure instantly vanished from above the puddle in the backyard. With a shake, Chan Ping'an suddenly became a temporary apprentice in Master Ruan's blacksmith shop. According to Master Ruan, someone needed to fill the void that Lu Xianying had left. He needed someone to dig wells, build houses, create canals, and so on. There was no reason for him to look after Lu Xianying for free. And thus, Chan Ping'an became the busiest person in the blacksmith shop. When it came to physical tasks, he was more so no inferior to any of the solidly built men. When he had some free time, Chan Ping'an would head over to that building to visit Lu Xianying. After taking a trip to the doors of death, Lu Xianying had become much less energetic and talkative than before. He also looked especially sickly and fragile. Perhaps this was because he still felt a lingering sense of apprehension in his heart after barely escaping death, or perhaps his vitality and spirit had been damaged by the mountain-moving ape's vicious punch. He always stared at the roof in a daze as he lay in bed, and apart from saying a few words to Chan Ping'an from time to time, he would almost never talk to anyone else. Chan Ping'an was also helpless against this situation. Fortunately, the wound on Lu Xianying's chest was healing quite quickly even though it was extremely severe. In fact, it was surprisingly healing much quicker than the wound on Chan Ping'an's left hand. Meanwhile, Ning Yao was still staying at Chan Ping'an's place in Clay Vase Alley. The man whom she referred to as Master Ruan had also surprisingly agreed to forge a sword for her, and even more surprisingly, he had said that the sword might be forged in just half a year if they were fortunate. If they were unfortunate, however, this might blow out to more than 10 years. Ning Yao had been quite broad-minded about this, and she had chuckled and said that she had always been a fairly lucky person. Thus, she wouldn't mind waiting for half a year. Even though Ning Yao still lived in Chan Ping'an's house, all of the medicinal ingredients and pots had been moved to the blacksmith workshop. This was so that Chan Ping'an didn't need to make so many back-and-forth trips. Meanwhile, Chan Ping'an was staying at Lu Xianying's place, and this was mainly to prevent thieves from taking advantage of his empty house. Chan Ping'an had gone to collect snake gall pebbles at night again, yet he had come up completely empty-handed, not even finding anything in the deep pit under the Azure Cow Ridge. In the words of Ning Yao, this was because snake gall pebbles were quite similar to people. They also needed to have vitality and spirit. Once they lost these things, they would become nothing more than elegant ornaments for the nobility. Perhaps they could be carved into inkstones. If they possessed vitality and spirit, however, it would be akin to a person draping on an imperial cape. The gulf between the two was like the gulf between heaven and earth. This caused Chan Ping'an to sigh and shake his head every time he walked past the creek. Ning Yao brought a set of keys over and gave them to Chan Ping'an, telling him that someone had tossed them into his courtyard. After a few tries, she had discovered that the set of keys belonged to his neighbor, Song Jisun. From the courtyard gate to the house door, everything could be opened. Chan Ping'an couldn't understand Song Jisun's intention. Logically speaking, Song Jisun's personality was such that he wouldn't have asked Chan Ping'an to clean his house for him. After all, with Song Jisun's temper, he most likely wouldn't allow others into his house even if it collapsed. Chan Ping'an understood Song Jisun better than anyone else. Song Jisun was an extremely generous person. Regardless of whether it was for himself or for Zhigui, he would be willing to spend all the money in his pockets even if it were 10 copper coins. At the same time, however, Song Jisun was also an extremely stingy person. If he wanted to have something to himself, then he wouldn't be willing to share it with others no matter what. To put it simply, if Song Jisun wanted to give someone something, then even giving them 1,000 gold coins wouldn't be an issue. If others wanted to obtain something from him, however, he would most definitely disagree. If Song Jisun were in a good mood, he would be willing to add icing to the cake for others. Regardless of what mood he was in, however, he definitely wouldn't help those in dire straits. Or perhaps it was Zhigui who had purposely tossed the keys into his courtyard. Chan Ping'an felt like the probability of this was small. When Chan Ping'an had heard Ning Yao talk about how she had opened the doors with the keys, his eyes had widened and his jaw had dropped. He had wanted to say something, but he ultimately refrained from doing so. Ning Yao had squinted her eyes and looked at him, with her slender brows causing her to appear especially domineering. She had stared at Chen Pingyan just like that. At the time, Ruan Xiu had been dazedly observing them from nearby, secretly enjoying the snacks that Chen Pingyan had helped her buy from the small town as she did so. In the end, Ning Yao had turned around to leave first. That day, she hadn't let Chen Pingyan brew medicine for her, and she had instead carried the pots and ingredients to an empty area behind the blacksmith shop. After struggling for half a day, the young girl had ended up with a charcoal-colored face thanks to all the billowing smoke that she had created. At the same time, she had also ended up with an entire pot of charcoal. When Ruan Xiu had walked past from a distance, she had enjoyed her sunflower seeds with relish. Ning Yao squatted on the floor and angrily stared at the pot of medicinal ingredients. She felt like brewing medicine was far more difficult than practicing sword techniques or saber techniques. Her face was filled with anger and indignance. There was something in the world that she, Ning Yao, couldn't do? By the looks of it, the concept of brewing medicine shouldn't exist in the world anymore. Chen Pingyan silently walked over and brewed a new pot of medicine for her, with his movements being smooth and deft. Ning Yao's lips moved slightly, yet she eventually didn't say anything to stop him. She simply seized an opportunity when he wasn't looking to wipe her face clean. Chen Pingyan squatted in front of the pot and carefully observed the flames. His arms were crossed on top of his knees, and his chin was resting on his forearm. "Laugh if you want to," Ning Yao humped coldly. However, Chen Pingyan didn't laugh at her misfortune. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on the flickering blue flames and said quietly, "I don't think you did anything bad, Ning Yao. However, those keys belong to someone else after all. Regardless of how they ended up in our courtyard, it's still not good to use them to open other people's doors. Even if Song Jisun and Jia never return to the small town again, the house next door is still their house. We're still outsiders." Ning Yao pursed her lips and grumbled, "Foolishly kind person. Stubborn fool. Stupidly fastidious reasoning." Chen Pingyan and Ning Yao turned around at almost the exact same time. There was a young man standing behind them, and this was a tall and slender person with an elegant and refined disposition. It was clear that he was not only an outsider but also a scholar. Chen Pingyan noticed that this person was looking at him with an extremely strange expression. However, this wasn't the same expression as the mountain-moving ape from Sun-Scorched Mountain or Fu Nanhua from Old Dragon City, an expression of arrogance and haughtiness. Nor was it the same expression as Taoist Lu or Ning Yao. Instead, his expression was extremely complicated, and there was seemingly pity, appreciation, but also a hint of loathing. In the end, the young man chose to quietly leave. Ning Yao frowned and said, "It's clear that his target is you. What's going on?" Chen Pingyan was also bewildered. He shook his head and replied, "I have no idea." After being interrupted by the mysterious outsider, the extremely minor grievances between Ning Yao and Chen Pingyan quickly vanished in a puff of smoke. However, the young man quickly returned again, and this time, there was a young woman with extremely long legs standing next to him. For some reason, Ruan Xiu was also with them. "They can't speak the dialect of this small town, so they asked me to come over to help," Ruan Xiu explained. "Chen Pingyan, this big sister, is the person who saved Lu Xianying. She has the same surname as you, but she isn't from Eastern Treasured Vile Continent." The person standing next to big sister Chen is Chen Songfeng, the eldest grandson of Dragontail County's Chen clan. According to big sister Chen, it seems like you two share the same ancestor, so you can be regarded as distant relatives from several hundred years ago. As for big sister Chen, her Chen clan is unrelated to your Chen clans even if we go 1,000 years or 2,000 years back. She's come here to worship her ancestors this time, but no one in the small town knows where her ancestors' graves are. From the Kiln Supervision Office to the big clans in Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley, none of them have got a clue. However, Lu Xianying mentioned you, and he said that you're the most knowledgeable person in the small town when it comes to the surrounding mountains and rivers. He said that they couldn't go wrong if they asked you. Big sister Chen said that she could compensate you if you helped, and she offered a pouch of gold essence copper coins. I feel like you can accept this offer." When she said this, Ruan Xiu secretly extended 2 fingers and waved them next to her waist. In addition to this, she also mouthed 2 pouches. She was clearly telling Chan Ping'an that he could ask for more payment. Otherwise, such a good opportunity wouldn't present itself again. After careful consideration, Chan Ping'an smiled and replied, "I've thought of a place that might be the location that she's looking for. As for compensation, there's no need for any. After all, this is only a matter of walking a few steps." Ruan Xiu was slightly frantic with worry. However, Ning Yao had already stepped forward and replied using the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. "It's not an issue for Chan Ping'an to bring you to your ancestral grave to worship them. However, you need to pay him 2 pouches of gold essence copper coins. There's no room for discussion. He's severely wounded right now, so it's not easy for him to trek such long distances. Moreover, you're also aware that Mr. Qi has told us outsiders to leave the small town as soon as possible. Chan Ping'an is only a mortal, yet you need him to increase his pace to bring you there. So 1 pouch of gold essence copper coins isn't enough." In fact, both Chan Dui and Chan Songfeng's eyes had lit up when they had first seen Ning Yao. Seeing her made them forget the vulgarity of the mortal world. This was akin to seeing an upright orchid in a desolate paddy field. Chan Dui openly looked her up and down. Ning Yao was dressed in a green robe, and she had both a sword and a saber hanging by her waists. She appeared especially pleasing to the eye. Chan Dui's solemn mood also improved slightly, and she replied with a smile, "As long as we can find my ancestors' graves, I'll be happy to pay 2 pouches. If we can't find it, however, I won't pay a single pouch. What do you say?" "Deal," Ning Yao said in a solemn voice. From the beginning to the end, it was as if this had nothing to do with Chan Ping'an. Ning Yao glared at Chan Ping'an, and it was as if her eyes were saying, "Don't try to give me any of your nonsense reasoning again. Otherwise, I'm truly going to hack you into pieces." Chan Ping'an forcefully suppressed his smile. He thought for a moment before saying to Ruan Xiu, "Please tell them that I have to brew some medicine for Ning Yao first. I'll need around 30 minutes. After that, I also want to have a chat with Lu Xianying. Finally, I also need you to help me pass on a message to Master Ruan. Whatever work I haven't done today, I'll definitely make up for it tomorrow." A hint of displeasure spread across Chan Dui's face when she heard that they couldn't set off immediately. Her expression was dark as she looked at the young boy in straw sandals. Chan Ping'an didn't shirk or relent. Ning Yao more so crossed her arms and wore a cold smile. Chan Dui suppressed her displeasure and quietly told herself that she needed to look at the bigger picture. She smiled at Ruan Xiu and said, "Xiu Xiu, tell him that we'll wait for him at the covered bridge. We'll wait for 1 hour at most, and if he still doesn't arrive by then, he'll have to face the consequences himself." Ruan Xiu replied with an aloof nod. Chan Dui and Chan Songfeng left together. Ruan Xiu smiled and said, "I'll go and tell my father." After brewing a pot of medicine for Ning Yao, Chan Ping'an went to chat with Lu Xianying. This was a room that was filled with the smell of medicine. Lu Xianying was resting in bed, and when he heard the sound of footsteps, he turned around to look over. His face wasn't exactly a healthy shade of pink, but it was already much better than the deathly white that it had been before. He squeezed out a smile and asked in a hoarse voice, "That Chan Dui woman spoke to you already?" Chan Ping'an nodded and replied, I'm going to bring them into the mountains in a bit." Lu Xianying thought for a moment before telling Chan Ping'an, "I'm going to leave with her. I'm going to go to a place that's apparently even larger than Eastern Treasured Vile Continent." In fact, Chan Dui had already visited Lu Xianying once before. However, Lu Xianying's mood had been quite downcast afterward, and he hadn't wanted to discuss his conversation with her with Chan Ping'an. He pursed his lips and said, "To tell you the truth, I don't even know what Eastern Treasured Vile Continent is." Chan Ping'an bent down and helped him fix his blankets, saying with a smile, "And I would know?" Lu Xianying rolled his eyes and asked, "Do you know what I'm most worried about?" Chan Ping'an shook his head. Lu Xianying turned his head and gazed at the roof again, saying, "In this place, I at least have you to help me off the bed. After that, I can grit my teeth and deal with the rest myself. But after I leave the small town, how am I going to shit and piss? Am I going to call them over and go, 'You come here and support me'?" Chan Ping'an could only scratch his head helplessly as he sat next to Lu Xianying's bed. Lu Xianying suddenly laughed and mused, "However, when I think about it, I've already died once, so do I still need to be afraid of this?" Things will only improve. Don't worry. Didn't old man Yao say before? Those who survive a catastrophe are bound to have good fortune later on. Chen Ping'an consoled. Lu Xianying felt slightly sad at the mention of old man Yao, and he said, Old man Yao barely ever said anything nice. However, he spoke basketfuls of demoralizing words, unlucky words and curse words. Ning Yao stood in the doorway, but she didn't interrupt their conversation. Chen Ping'an helped Lu Xianying fix his blankets again, and he stood up and said, I need to bring them into the mountains now. Remember to rest well. Lu Xianying nodded and said, You remember to be careful as well. Chen Ping'an quietly walked out of the room, and Ning Yao followed by his side. You're also going to enter the mountains? Chen Ping'an asked in curiosity. Ning Yao furrowed her brows and replied, I don't trust them. Chen Ping'an nodded and said, That makes sense. It doesn't hurt to be careful. The two of them briskly walked next to the creek, and Ning Yao told him, Almost all of the outsiders have left already. The spring thunder rumbled, and the startled insects scattered. The two groups of people met at the southern end of the covered bridge. Apart from Ning Yao and Lu Baqiao, the swordsman from Wind Lightning Field who had come to join the fun, the remaining three people were Chan Dui from another continent, Chan Songfeng from Dragontail County, and Chen Ping'an from Clayvase Alley. Lu Baqiao glowed with exuberance when he saw Chen Ping'an and Ning Yao, and his first comment to the latter was, Young lady, when you grow older, you definitely won't be any less beautiful than celestial maiden Su. This was perhaps the ultimate praise that a woman could receive from Lu Baqiao. Ning Yao's expression naturally grew dark. However, before she could even say anything, Lu Baqiao, who could speak the dialect of the small town, had already turned around and raised a thumb at Chen Ping'an. The eyes of this prodigious swordsman were clear as he praised. Your physique is merely that of a mortal, yet you actually dared to challenge that ape from Sun-Scorched Mountain. More importantly, you actually managed to survive. This is an absolute miracle. Lu Baqiao was truly curious. Just how did this skinny young boy possess such astonishing and explosive power? Lu Baqiao retracted his thumb and slowed down a little, not walking side by side with Chan Dui and Chan Songfeng anymore. Instead, he chose to walk next to Chen Ping'an. He turned around and said with a smile, Even though Sun-Scorched Mountain is only a measly hill that houses some cowards who don't live up to their reputation, that old ape has indeed built up his reputation using his fists and strength. This was especially the case after the founding sect leader of Sun-Scorched Mountain passed away. In the 200 years prior to when Sun-Scorched Mountain opened its third mountain, it was essentially that old ape alone who guarded the entire Sun-Scorched Mountain. It was because of him that Sun-Scorched Mountain wasn't gobbled up by the nearby forces. Of course, Sun-Scorched Mountain had only been a small and mediocre sect at that time. Because of this, their enemies weren't too powerful either. If they had offended our Wind Lightning Field at that time, their fate would have been sealed. With a single command from the Elder, I would be granted a sword tablet. I would then fly above Sun-Scorched Mountain myself and lightly drop our Lightning Field sword formation. After facing this downpour of swords, Sun-Scorched Mountain would be done for. Lu Baqiao casually made a throwing gesture. Ning Yao ruthlessly exposed him, retorting, Sun-Scorched Mountain isn't as pathetic as you make them out to be. Wind Lightning Field isn't as powerful as you say either. Lu Baqiao didn't feel embarrassed or ashamed at all. Instead, he quickly and smoothly changed topics, and he said to Chen Ping'an in a mysterious voice, I heard that this covered bridge used to be a stone arch bridge, and there's a rusty old sword hanging under it. I think that it's used to keep out dragons and floods? Generally speaking, these old and seemingly unremarkable objects are almost definitely extraordinary treasures. Perhaps this is even a divine treasure that can astonish heaven and earth. Lu Baqiao forcefully stomped his feet on the wooden walkway of the covered bridge, continuing, However, I lay on the ground and knocked on the bridge for half a day, but I still didn't make any discoveries. Perhaps this treasure isn't fated to be mine? But how can that be? I'm a hidden sword prodigy. If that old sword really is a divine weapon, it should at least resonate with me even if it doesn't fly over to accept me as its master, right? Maybe this old sword is only SOSO, and really isn't anything more than a slightly older object? Sigh, what a shame. Walking next to him, Chen Ping'an couldn't help but feel slightly stupefied. Lu Baqiao didn't look like he was joking at all. In fact, his expression was completely serious. Even though his words couldn't be regarded as reasonable, they couldn't be simply dismissed as unreasonable either. Not caring about whether Chen Ping'an found him annoying or not, Lu Baqiao continued to rattle on about all the interesting things that he had seen and heard in the small town. For example, he mentioned a person who had obtained an enviable fated opportunity, and they had actually been able to drag the entire iron chain out of the dragon-locking well. However, there was also some person who had failed to obtain any fated opportunity even after walking around for several days. While they were walking through a rundown alley, however, they had casually looked up and surprisingly found a copper mirror embedded in the wall above someone's gate. Making a last-ditch effort, this person had grabbed a ladder and climbed up to take a look. And guess what? The bronze mirror was an ancestor among the demon-exposing mirrors. The bronze mirror was decorated with ancient patterns of clouds and thunder, and there were also 8 characters carved around it. Sun and moon's radiance, illuminating heaven and earth. The person had been so overjoyed that they had started bawling on the ladder. Elsewhere, there had also been a rich young lady from Sea-Tide Cavalry who had obtained fortune from misfortune, becoming acquainted with Mr. Cui from Lakeview Academy. The two of them had immediately become like old friends. After crossing the covered bridge, Chen Dui and Chen Songfeng naturally slowed down to let Chen Ping'an walk ahead and lead the way. The 5 people followed the nameless small creek upstream. Chen Ping'an was carrying a large and yellowed bamboo basket, while Chen Songfeng was carrying an adorable green bamboo bookcase. Lu Baqiao was extremely curious about what Chen Ping'an was carrying in his bamboo basket, and he insisted on investigating it no matter what. Thus, he told Chen Ping'an to stop, and he started rifling through the basket. However, he discovered that it was filled with random items. There were 3 bamboo hats stacked together, 2 flasks, one with water and one with oil, a large machete and a small machete, 2 flintstones, and a bundle of firewood. At the bottom of the basket, there was also a row of around 7 or 8 bamboo tubes that had been split in half and put back together again. Apart from this, there was also a small cloth pouch with a fishing line and hooks. Chen Ping'an, what are those tubes of bamboo for? Lu Baqiao asked. There are 8 tubes of bamboo in total, and 6 of them are filled with 4 rice balls each. The other 2 are filled with difficult-to-perish pickled vegetables, Chen Ping'an replied. Lu Baqiao wore a smug expression as he announced loudly, "Pickled vegetables? I've eaten them before." Even his footsteps became lighter and livelier. Chen Ping'an shot a strange glance at him. Was eating pickled vegetables something to be proud of? Of course, this was unless he could finish an entire tube of pickled vegetables in one sitting without eating any rice or drinking any water. That would definitely be quite a feat. Lu Baqiao suddenly asked in curiosity, "We're not venturing that far away, so we'll probably only need to have 3 meals at most. Is there really a need for 2 entire tubes of pickled vegetables? These pickled vegetables, just 1 small chopstick of them is enough for me to finish half a bowl of rice." Chen Ping'an was contemplating which mountain path to take to reach their destination quicker, and he casually replied, "Ning Yao and I are going to share 1 tube of pickled vegetables, and you and your 2 friends are going to share the other tube of pickled vegetables." Lu Baqiao faltered for a moment before chuckling softly and saying, "Haha, there's no need to treat me as an outsider. I can eat from the same bamboo tube as you two." "No way. You can go eat with your friends," Ning Yao said firmly. "Why?" Lu Baqiao fumed. Ning Yao gestured with her chin, signifying that the answer was with Chen Ping'an. At the same time, it also signaled that it was beneath her to talk with Lu Baqiao so much. Lu Baqiao looked over with sulkiness in his eyes. However, there was also a hint of eager anticipation behind this sulkiness. Chen Ping'an smiled and shook his head. Lu Baqiao sighed in exasperation, remarking, "Valuing your lover over your friend, I can understand this. You two are friends already? Then you surely have thousands of friends, if not tens of thousands, right?" Ning Yao sneered in ridicule. "How is that possible?" Lu Baqiao glared at her and retorted. Ning Yao raised a brow and helped him correct his words, saying, "How is it possibly so few?" Lu Baqiao clicked his tongue in wonder and commented, "Ning Yao, your personality can't compare to Celestial Maiden Su's." Ning Yao frowned and asked, "Are you referring to Sun-Scorched Mountain Su Jia?" "That's right," Lu Baqiao replied with increasing smugness. "Jia is in the Jia from the sage's words. Crops are liked by all people. How is it? Isn't my Mrs. name beautiful and soul-stirring? Ning Yao asked him a question that Chan Ping'an definitely wouldn't understand. If you genuinely like Su Jia, then have you ever thought about this before? What will you do if she also likes you? Lu Baqiao was instantly rendered speechless. He opened and closed his mouth many times, and in the end, he could only murmur in a timid voice, "How can she possibly like me?" Chen Ping'an felt like Lu Baqiao wasn't a bad person. Chan Dui and Chan Songfeng walked a dozen or so paces behind Chan Ping'an and the others. Chan Songfeng was slightly envious of Lu Baqiao's good relationship with Chan Ping'an. Lu Baqiao seemed like someone who was born with the ability to talk to anyone, regardless of what teaching or sect they came from and regardless of whether they were emperors or peasants. There wasn't anyone in the world who he couldn't talk to. When that woman caught wind of the situation, she immediately visited the Kiln Supervision Office and offered to return the suit of armor as an apology on behalf of Light Breeze City's Su clan. "Why didn't you accept it?" Chan Songfeng asked quietly. Compared to when she had first entered the small town, Chan Dui was evidently much more amiable. If this were in the past, she would have simply ignored Chan Songfeng's question. Now, however, she patiently explained, if Light Breeze City's Su clan had known the truth, that Lu Xianying was a descendant of the Yinyin Chan clan's graveyard attendants, then they naturally would have had to pay a hefty price if they still dared to target him. Simply returning the suit of armor wouldn't have been anywhere near enough. However, since they weren't aware of these secrets, it's only natural and right that they fought for this precious fated opportunity. The Yinyin Chan clan isn't so arrogant and domineering. Chan Songfeng smiled and said, "Perhaps Light Breeze City's Su clan was also intending to scheme against Sunscorch Mountain. Otherwise, if it wasn't for that old ape leading the charge and being used as a decoy by the woman, it's very likely that she wouldn't have been able to obtain the suit of armor." Chan Dui reverted to her original self, smiling coldly and sneering. Swarming like flies and being herded like sheep. Some people only know how to flow with the crowd. Yet they never stop to consider where the tide is truly heading. Chan Songfeng lowered his voice and said in a seemingly casual manner, "Perhaps they know, but they're simply powerless. Rather than struggling in vain to chase after something significant, they've decided that it's better to fish for some lower-hanging fruit." Chan Dui turned around and shot a glance at the young man from Dragontail County's Chan clan. She didn't offer any comment on his casual remark. They were about to enter the mountains soon, and Chan Ping'an stopped and was just about to turn around. However, Chan Dui said at almost the exact same moment, "Lu Baqiao, tell him that he only needs to worry about leading the way. The quicker the better." Lu Baqiao had witnessed more than half of Chan Ping'an's rooftop battle with Bai Yuan from far away, and after going back, he had spiritedly recounted the events to Chan Songfeng. Chan Dui had also been present at the time, so she knew that she couldn't treat Chan Ping'an as if he were an ordinary young boy. In the end, it was surprisingly Chan Songfeng who became the laggard. Even though this rich and handsome young man also liked to climb mountains and go on adventures, he was truly lacking in ability when compared to the four other people. Chan Dui was an elite martial artist, and Lu Baqiao was a swordsman. Swordsmen being cultivators who placed heavy emphasis on tempering one's physique. Meanwhile, Ning Yao and Chan Ping'an had more so been able to battle with the supremely powerful mountain-moving ape. Mountain paths were difficult to traverse. This was especially the case after a spring drizzle, when the earth would be soft and muddy. Add to the fact that they needed to cross the occasional stream and cliff, and this made Chan Songfeng pour with sweat and feel extremely parched. Afterward, even with Lu Baqiao helping Chan Songfeng carry his bookcase, Chan Songfeng still panted like an old cow, with his face as white as a sheet. Chan Ping'an asked Chan Dui if they needed to slow down, to which Chan Dui replied with a shake of her head. While they were crossing a stream, Chan Songfeng accidentally slipped after stepping on a rock that was covered in algae. He crashed into the water and appeared as disheveled as could be. Chan Dui stopped in her tracks and looked back. Even though she didn't speak, her dark expression was more than enough to convey her thoughts. Lu Baqiao hurriedly turned around and helped Chan Songfeng up. "I'm okay, don't worry about me. I can definitely keep up," Chan Songfeng said apologetically. Chan Ping'an took this opportunity to shrug off his bamboo basket and lean it against a depressed area in the mountain face. He looked at them and said, "Let's rest for 15 minutes." Ning Yao naturally didn't mind this. She squatted near Chan Ping'an and she held the hilts of her sword and saber in boredom, lightly pressing down on them and causing the tip of the scabbards to lightly tap against the green cliff face. The crisp clacking sound was seemingly singing in harmony with the whoosh of the stream water. "Keep going," Chan Duai ordered in a solemn voice. Chan Ping'an shook his head and said, "When traversing through mountains, one shouldn't use all of their strength in a single breath. When he gradually grows accustomed to this, he will be able to keep up with us. It isn't his stamina that's lacking, and he's simply just a little short of breath." Chan Ping'an was indeed an expert when it came to traversing mountains and crossing rivers. Unexpectedly, however, Chan Duai completely ignored Chan Ping'an's advice. She looked at Chan Songfeng and directly said, "You can return to the small town." Chan Songfeng wore a bitter expression as he looked at the commanding and indubitable gaze of Chan Duai. He turned to Lu Baqiao and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you with carrying the bookcase from Haran." Lu Baqiao was furious, and he immediately threw the bookcase at Chan Duai, shouting, "Bullshit! I'm not going to take your crap anymore." Chan Duai's expression was calm as she picked up the bookcase and slung it over her back. She looked at Chan Ping'an and said, "Let's go." Chan Ping'an thought for a moment before retrieving 2 bamboo tubes from his basket and gently tossing them toward Lu Baqiao. "Here, you can eat these if you get hungry on the way back." Chan Songfeng spoke quietly as he tried to dissuade Lu Baqiao from accompanying him back. However, Lu Baqiao caught the bamboo tubes and spat with a cold chuckle. "I'm not going to deal with this nonsense anymore. After returning to the kiln supervision office with you, I'm going to order a table full of good wine and good food. I'm going to have large plates of meat and delicacies. Will that not be better than this?" Chan Duai turned around and continued forward. Chan Ping'an picked up his bamboo basket, but he still felt a little worried. He looked at Lu Baqiao and asked, "Do you remember the way back?" "I do," Lu Baqiao replied with a smile. Chan Ping'an nodded before leaving with Ning Yao. The 3 of them gradually disappeared into the distance. Chan Songfeng sat down on a rock and lamented in a bitter voice. "Why cause trouble for yourself? Forging a good relationship with the Yingyin Chang clan is good for both you and Wind Lightning Field. Why do you insist on acting so rashly?" Lu Baqiao cracked open a bamboo tube, revealing the snow-white balls of rice inside. His spirits were high as he praised, "Sure enough, Chan Ping'an is still as kind as always. As expected of my good brother." Chan Songfeng understood Lu Baqiao's temper, so he didn't try to persuade him anymore. He smiled in a self-deprecating manner and sighed, "I'm just a useless scholar. If I had known this, I should have asked Chan Ping'an to leave us a tube of pickled vegetables as well," Lu Baqiao muttered. He grabbed a rice ball and started munching down on it, saying in a muffled voice, "Your comment isn't correct either. Mr. Qi from the small town, and naturally Mr. Qi's master as well, are both very impressive people." Chan Songfeng appeared to be in a trance as he asked, "What do you think Mr. Qi is trying to do?" "Heaven knows," Lu Baqiao casually replied. Chan Songfeng extended his arms and shook his soaked outer garment, sighing, Indeed, heaven knows." In the blacksmith shop next to the creek, Lu Xianying lay down and fell asleep again. Ruan Qiong sat next to the bed, a grave look in his eyes. Lu Xianying's breathing was slow and drawn out. So be it if this was all. Most importantly, the breaths that he exhaled were like the clouds in the mountains and the mists above the lakes. They were foggy white and didn't dissipate in the air. Instead, they slowly gathered in front of his nose and mouth. In the end, it was as if there were a 3-inch-long white flood dragon laying coiled above his face, using his sleep and dreams as a sword furnace, forging a divine sword with his breath. Ruan Qiong rubbed his chin and praised, "So you're taking the extreme path of breaking the old to establish the new. All your acupoints have been destroyed, and all the passageways are now defenseless. Even though your body has been comprehensively ruined, this sword, it's ultimately been forged successfully. Not only can one forge a sword, but one can also practice the way of the sword. No wonder this sword scripture is so coveted and sought after. Sleeping is cultivation, and dreaming is also cultivation. The great Tao is within reach." Ruan Qiong stood up and said in a self-deprecating voice, "If I had known this earlier, I wouldn't have let the Yingyin Chang clan borrow you for 20 years. 3 horse-drawn carriages continued to trundle forward, advancing up the mountain road that seemingly had no end. they finally reached the mountain peak. Song Jisun and Zhihou walked down from the carriage and exchanged a glance. The mountain peak was a flat and even platform, and in the middle, there stood 2 stone pillars. However, between the 2 stone pillars was a curtain of light that looked like flowing water. It was impossible to see what lay behind this water. It was as if a heavenly gate stood before them. Zhihou stared intently at the gate. Meanwhile, Song Jisun turned around and walked to the perimeter of the mountain peak, gazing into the distance. Vast stretches of mountains and rivers appeared before him, causing him to feel relaxed and at ease. Song Chongjing was wearing a fox fur coat at this moment, with his face also appearing extremely pale. However, he was in a very good mood, and he stood next to Song Jisun and said with a smile, "This jewel small world is located in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, and it's one of the 36 mystical realms. It's not renowned for its size, and it only measures 500 kilometers in radius." Song Chongjing didn't turn around, and he simply pointed back at the gate behind them as he continued. After passing through that gate, there's a set of cloud steps that leads all the way down. After walking around 15 kilometers, you'll have finally set foot on the land of the Great Li Empire. If you turn around and look back at that time, perhaps you won't be able to see it clearly anymore. However, you can know this. That is indeed the Jewel Small World. In fact, the Jewel Small World that hovers high in the sky is indeed. Song Chongjing paused for a brief moment before continuing. Just a small jewel.